The party she'll never forget. My wife's shocking revenge. The night should have been perfect. Jacob had everything planned down to the last detail. The room at the luxurious restaurant was filled with laughter, warm lights, and the clinking of glasses. He had climbed his way up in the company over the past few years, and tonight was meant to celebrate his promotion, finally reaching the coveted executive position. It was the validation he craved, proof of his success, and the cherry on top of all his sacrifices. As he stood surrounded by coworkers, friends, and family, Lisa, his wife of 12 years, sat quietly at a table near the back of the room, her eyes scanning the crowd, occasionally landing on her husband. But what everyone else saw as a picture-perfect evening was, to her, a farce. The tension in her mind felt thick, almost choking her, but outwardly, she played the part of the doting wife, at least for a little while longer. Chapter 1. The First Signs. Jacob had always been driven, ambitious to a fault. For the first decade of their marriage, his dedication to work never seemed out of place. Long hours were part of the package with his corporate job, and Lisa accepted that. It wasn't always easy, but they made it work. They had their routine. Weekends spent together, occasional date nights when his schedule allowed, and of course, the simple joys of just being in each other's company after a long day. But over the past few months, something had shifted. Lisa couldn't put her finger on it at first. It wasn't like Jacob had suddenly changed overnight, but his behavior felt different. He began taking more frequent work trips, sometimes with barely a day's notice. When she'd ask where he was going or what the trip was for, his answers were vague, just a quick meeting with the clients, or, I'll be in New York for a couple of days, nothing major. At first, Lisa tried to be understanding. Jacob had been gunning for a promotion for years, and it seemed like it was finally within reach. She didn't want to question him or make him feel like she wasn't supportive. But then there were the late-night meetings, phone calls that ended abruptly when she walked into the room, and text messages that he quickly hid by turning his phone screen away from her. Still, she told herself it was the stress. Work was demanding. Everyone knew that. So she didn't press him, didn't ask the questions that bubbled at the back of her mind. Not yet. Then came the night when everything changed. It was a Tuesday, a regular weeknight, and Jacob had come home late again. Lisa had been dozing on the couch when she heard the click of the door opening. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and watched as Jacob walked in, looking tired but otherwise normal. He bent down to kiss her on the cheek, as he always did, but something was different. There was a scent, faint but unmistakable, perfume. It wasn't hers. She sniffed again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just her imagination. Jacob worked with plenty of women in the office. It could have been anything. But as he walked past her to the kitchen, the scent lingered in the air. Floral, musky, a rich, unfamiliar scent that clung to his clothes in a way that felt too personal to ignore. Lisa didn't say anything that night. She let it slide, telling herself she was being paranoid. Work trips, office environments, people are close in meetings. Maybe it was nothing. She convinced herself that the perfume was just a coincidence. But then it happened again, a few weeks later. Jacob came home from another trip, this time to Chicago. He hugged her at the door, and there it was, the same perfume, stronger this time, more pungent as if it had clung to him for hours. Lisa's stomach twisted into a knot. It wasn't a coincidence anymore. This time, the scent felt like an accusation, a lingering reminder that something was wrong. She didn't mention it immediately. In fact, she said nothing at all as they sat down for dinner. But her mind raced, replaying every odd moment over the past few months, the late-night meetings, the rushed phone calls, the way he'd been too busy to answer her texts. She started noticing smaller things. Jacob's phone, once casually left on the counter or coffee table, was now constantly in his pocket, always face down if he did leave it out. He was quieter at home, often distracted or lost in thought. When they were together, he seemed like a shell of the man she'd married, present physically but mentally 1,000 miles away. His excuses for being late felt rehearsed, too perfect. Lisa tried to rationalize it, telling herself she was overthinking things. But deep down, she couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that had begun to take root in her mind. The scent of that perfume was like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment when she would no longer be able to deny the truth. The nights grow longer. As the weeks wore on, the distance between them became palpable. Their once lively conversations had been replaced by a dull routine. They barely talked anymore, and when they did, it was about the mundane aspects of life. The grocery list, upcoming bills, anything that avoided the real issue looming between them. Lisa found herself going to bed earlier just to avoid the awkwardness, leaving Jacob in front of the TV to finish up whatever show he was mindlessly watching. The nights when he was home became fewer and fewer. There was always an excuse: "I've got a late client dinner," or "this trip just came up out of nowhere." Lisa played along, still trying to convince herself that it was just work stress. But every time he left, she felt the knot in her stomach tighten, and every time he came home, she caught that same scent. By now, it had become an unspoken presence between them, like a third party that Lisa couldn't escape. One night, after yet another late arrival, Lisa stood in the kitchen washing dishes, watching Jacob through the reflection in the window as he sat at the dining table with his phone in his hand. He was typing quickly, smiling slightly at something on the screen. Lisa's heart sank. Whoever he was texting, it wasn't about work. The next morning, when Jacob was in the shower, she grabbed his phone. Her heart pounded as she swiped through his notifications, but there was nothing suspicious, just a few emails, some group texts with his coworkers. She scrolled a little further, opening his Messages app, only to find everything wiped clean. Her hands shook as she put the phone back, pretending she hadn't just confirmed her worst fear. He was hiding something. The final straw. Lisa's tipping point came one evening when Jacob was supposed to be away on yet another business trip, this time to Philadelphia. He had left that morning with a suitcase and his usual excuse of client meetings and presentations. But later that night, as Lisa sat alone in the living room, sipping tea and trying to focus on a book, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Caitlin, her friend who lived downtown. "Hey Lisa, I just saw Jacob at the Grove. Didn't know you guys were out tonight. He was with some people from work?" Lisa stared at the message, her blood turning to ice. The Grove was a restaurant just 10 minutes away from their house, not in Philadelphia. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and car keys, her heart racing with a mix of fear and anger. When she arrived at the restaurant, her suspicions were confirmed. There, in the corner booth, sat Jacob, laughing, chatting, his arm around a younger woman, the perfume unmistakable. The woman leaned into him, whispering something in his ear that made him smile. Lisa stood frozen outside the window, her world crashing down around her. The man she had trusted for 12 years was living a lie right under her nose. And now, she had no choice but to find out just how deep the betrayal went. I really feel for Lisa in this part of the story. She's not jumping to conclusions. She's patient and caring, even giving Jacob the benefit of the doubt. But when that unfamiliar perfume appeared twice, her instincts kicked in. Instead of confronting him immediately, Lisa smartly starts gathering evidence, showing strength and control. Jacob, meanwhile, is manipulating her, hiding his affair behind work excuses and perfectly rehearsed lies. But Lisa isn't naive. She's quietly planning her next move. This chapter sets the stage for her epic revenge, and I can't wait to see it unfold. Chapter 2. Collecting the Clues. Lisa had never considered herself the type of person to snoop or spy on her husband. In the 12 years they had been married, she believed in the foundation they had built: trust, love, and mutual respect. But lately, those pillars were crumbling, and she couldn't ignore the growing feeling of unease gnawing at her. The final straw came one night when Jacob claimed he had another business trip to New York. His frequent travel wasn't anything new, but this time felt different. A few days earlier, Lisa had overheard part of a phone conversation while passing by his office at home. His tone was hushed, secretive, and although she didn't hear much, one line stood out: "Can't wait to see you." It echoed in her head long after the call ended. When she walked in to ask about dinner, Jacob had quickly ended the call, his smile a little too forced, his explanation too vague. Her gut told her everything she needed to know. Something was wrong. But Lisa didn't confront him that night. No, she couldn't let her emotions take control. She had learned from the best. Jacob was too good at pretending, too smooth with his excuses. If she wanted the truth, she needed a plan, not an accusation that he could easily deny. That night, as Jacob packed for his trip, Lisa sat in bed, scrolling through her phone. She wasn't even paying attention to the news stories or social media posts in front of her. Her mind was racing, formulating what she needed to do next. She realized that the days of trusting Jacob to tell her the truth were over. The stakes were too high, and her heart was on the line. She needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence of his betrayal. The private investigator. The next day, Lisa made a decision she never thought she'd make. She called a private investigator. It felt surreal, sitting in her car in the driveway, phone in hand, scrolling through names on a local agency's website. When she called the number and spoke with Frank, the investigator, her voice was calm, almost businesslike, though inside she was a storm of emotions. Frank's voice was steady, confident. He'd handled cases like this before, plenty of them. Lisa wasn't the first woman to call with suspicions about her husband, and she wouldn't be the last. He assured her that while it wasn't easy, it was better to know the truth than to be kept in the dark. Lisa agreed. The not knowing was already tearing her apart. Frank's calm professionalism helped put her mind at ease. Within a day, he had begun his surveillance, tailing Jacob on his trip to New York. He promised to keep her updated, but the wait was unbearable. Lisa tried to go about her days as usual, keeping up her appearances at work and around friends, but her mind was consumed by what Frank might find. She still played her role as the perfect wife, smiling when Jacob called from the road, pretending everything was fine. It was torture. She couldn't let on that she knew something, couldn't let Jacob hear the tremor in her voice or see the doubt in her eyes. Every call from him was like a dagger, and every "I love you" he threw in at the end felt more like a lie than the last. The proof. A few days later, Frank delivered the first piece of the puzzle. Lisa sat in her car outside the grocery store when she received the email. Subject identified at hotel, surveillance footage attached. Her heart raced as she opened the attachment, her fingers trembling as she clicked through the photos. There it was, Jacob, arm in arm with a younger woman, smiling as they entered a hotel. Another shot showed them leaving hours later. The woman was Megan, someone Lisa had never seen before, and yet her presence felt like a knife twisting deeper into Lisa's gut. There was no denying the look in Jacob's eyes, the affection, the familiarity. He hadn't just stumbled into an affair. He had chosen this, deliberately. The shock hit her in waves. She felt lightheaded, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. This was it, the confirmation she dreaded but knew was coming. She had imagined this moment so many times, picturing what she would do, how she would react. But now that it was real, all she felt was hollow. She forwarded the photos to her private email, then deleted them from her phone, knowing she couldn't leave any trace. Not yet. She wasn't done. Digging deeper. Over the next few weeks, Lisa continued to gather more evidence. Frank provided her with more surveillance, Jacob and Megan meeting up at a restaurant, another hotel visit, even a day spent together at a park. It wasn't just sex, Lisa realized. Jacob had a relationship with this woman. That realization hit her harder than the betrayal itself. He was emotionally invested in Megan in a way that Lisa hadn't seen in their own marriage for months, maybe years. But she wasn't just relying on Frank. She began to go through Jacob's things while he was at work, his emails, his financial records. It was easier than she thought it would be. Jacob had become careless, overconfident in his ability to keep his secret. The emails told the rest of the story. They had met 6 months ago at a conference in Chicago, and from there, the relationship had escalated quickly. Lavish dinners, hotel stays, expensive gifts, all charged to the same credit card. Lisa took screenshots of everything, compiling a file that grew thicker by the day. She found a hidden folder on his laptop filled with photos of Megan, some of them taken in places she recognized. Restaurants Jacob had once taken Lisa to, trips they had planned but never gone on. Jacob had told Megan the same lies he told Lisa. He was stressed, overworked, just trying to make time for the people in his life. And in both cases, those lies had worked, until now. The waiting game. Each day that passed felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the inevitable confrontation. But Lisa was patient. She knew she couldn't rush this. Her goal wasn't just to confront Jacob. She wanted to destroy the facade he had built and make sure that when it all came crashing down, he had nowhere to hide. She kept playing her part, smiling, nodding, pretending that everything was fine when Jacob came home from work, kissed her on the cheek, and asked about her day. But inside, she was counting down the days until she could finally unleash the storm. Lisa didn't want to be the naive wife anymore. She didn't want to be the woman who was left in the dark, lied to, and taken for granted. Jacob had stolen that trust from her, and now, she was preparing to take back her power in the most devastating way possible. This was just the beginning. Chapter 3. The Perfect Trap. Lisa had never been the type to create drama or seek confrontation. Throughout her marriage to Jacob, she had always chosen the path of compromise and understanding, even when things got tough. But this betrayal was different. It wasn't just an affair. It was a complete destruction of trust, a violation of everything she had believed in their relationship. She wasn't going to let it slide. She needed to take control, but not in a rash, emotional way. No, Lisa wanted to make Jacob feel the full weight of his actions. And she had the perfect opportunity to do it. Jacob's promotion party was the talk of his office, a celebration of his recent success, and Lisa knew it would be the perfect stage for her revenge. The idea simmered in her mind for weeks as she quietly gathered more and more evidence. Now, with her plan taking shape, she realized this wasn't just about exposing his affair. It was about publicly dismantling the image he had carefully crafted. But she needed an accomplice, someone who could make the revelation even more devastating. Megan, the woman Jacob had been seeing, was essential to this plan. Lisa had thought long and hard about how to approach her. She could have harbored resentment or lashed out at Megan for being with Jacob, but instead, she saw Megan for what she truly was, another victim of Jacob's lies. The invitation. The day before the party, Lisa finally made her move. She found Megan's contact information through one of the receipts she had discovered in Jacob's emails, a dinner reservation at an upscale restaurant. Lisa hesitated before dialing Megan's number, her hands shaking slightly as she pressed the call button. How would Megan react? Would she even believe her? The phone rang twice before Megan picked up, her voice soft and unsuspecting. Hello? Megan, Lisa said calmly. This is Lisa, Jacob's wife. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end. Lisa could practically hear Megan's heart drop, her breath catching as she processed the bombshell of the introduction. I'm not calling to blame you, Lisa continued, keeping her voice steady. But you and I need to talk. I know about you and Jacob, and I think you deserve to know what's really going on. Megan's voice trembled when she finally spoke. I didn't know he was still with you. He told me he was getting a divorce. I swear, I didn't know. Lisa let out a sigh. I believe you, Megan. Jacob has been lying to both of us. I'm not angry at you, but I want you to help me set things right. He can't get away with this. After a few more minutes of conversation, Lisa explained her plan, the public revelation at the promotion party. She told Megan everything. How Jacob had manipulated her, how he had kept both of them in the dark, and how this party would be the perfect opportunity to expose his lies. At first, Megan was hesitant. She didn't want to face Jacob or be caught up in a public spectacle. But after hearing Lisa's side and realizing just how deep Jacob's deception went, Megan agreed. She, too, had been played, and she wasn't about to let Jacob walk away unscathed. Lisa's plan was now fully in motion. The legal maneuvering. While Megan's role was crucial, Lisa also had another part of her plan quietly brewing. She wanted to hit Jacob where it hurt, not just emotionally, but financially. Over the past few weeks, she had been meeting with her lawyer, preparing the divorce papers that would leave Jacob with nothing. Their house, their investments, his assets, all of it would be on the line. She wasn't going to confront Jacob without making sure that, by the end of the night, he'd lose far more than just his reputation. She signed the final paperwork the morning of the party, feeling a sense of resolve as she watched her lawyer carefully slide the documents into a sealed envelope. Are you sure you want to serve him at the party? Her lawyer had asked cautiously, sensing the intensity of her plan. Lisa nodded without hesitation. He deserves this. He's taken everything from me, and tonight, I'm taking it all back. Chapter 4. The party begins. That evening, the grand ballroom at the restaurant was bustling with energy. Jacob's colleagues, friends, and even some family members had gathered to celebrate his big promotion. There were elegant centerpieces on the tables, champagne being passed around, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed in the space. Jacob was in his element, shaking hands, exchanging laughs, and relishing the attention. Lisa, meanwhile, was the picture of composure. Dressed in a sleek black dress, she smiled and mingled with the guests, perfectly hiding the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. She had one eye on Jacob at all times, watching as he moved through the crowd, soaking in the praise. It was almost nauseating how normal he looked, how easily he could act as if everything was fine, as if his betrayal wasn't lurking just beneath the surface. But Lisa had her own secret weapon waiting in the wings. Megan had arrived early, discreetly sitting near the back of the room, blending in with the other guests. No one noticed her, not even Jacob. Everything was in place. The whispers among the crowd about Jacob's recent success were bittersweet to Lisa, but she held her resolve. She had one final part to play before the curtains were pulled back on Jacob's deceit: the speech. As the night progressed, the time finally came for Jacob to give his speech. He took the stage with a grin that stretched across his face, holding a glass of champagne as he began to thank everyone who had supported him. His voice boomed with confidence, his words oozing with pride. "I couldn't have done this without my incredible team," he began, nodding toward his colleagues. "And of course, my friends and family who have been by my side through thick and thin." Lisa stood near the stage, her hands gripping her own champagne glass tightly. The crowd was completely captivated by Jacob's charisma, his charm. It was almost laughable how easily he could fool them, but not for long. "And finally," Jacob said, turning toward Lisa, "I have to thank my amazing wife, Lisa. She has been my rock, supporting me every step of the way." The crowd clapped, turning their attention to Lisa, who smiled up at him with a calmness that belied the chaos about to unfold. Jacob raised his glass in her direction, expecting her to simply smile back and raise hers. But instead, Lisa stepped forward. "I just want to say a few words," she said, her voice loud enough to silence the crowd. Jacob blinked, slightly surprised but still smiling. "Of course," he said, stepping aside to let her take the stage. Lisa took a deep breath, feeling her heart pound in her chest. But she wasn't nervous. She was ready. She had been ready for weeks. "I just want to thank my husband for organizing this wonderful evening," she began, her voice steady. "He's been busy lately." There was a slight pause, just long enough for the tension to build. The room was eerily quiet now, sensing something was off in Lisa's tone. Jacob turned toward her, his smile faltering slightly, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Lisa held up her phone. The lights in the room dimmed, and the projector screen behind her flickered to life. The first image appeared. Jacob and Megan, holding hands outside the hotel. The room gasped as the image was projected onto the massive screen for everyone to see. The crowd, once buzzing with excitement, now stood in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the screen and Jacob. Jacob froze, his face draining of color as he realized what was happening. He opened his mouth to speak, but Lisa cut him off. "You see," she said, her voice calm but filled with icy fury, "while my husband was busy at work, he was also busy doing this." As more photos appeared, Jacob and Megan at restaurants, at hotels, laughing and holding each other. It became clear that the Jacob everyone thought they knew was a lie. His colleagues exchanged awkward glances. His friends looked horrified, and his family, seated at the front, watched in disbelief. The perfect trap had been set, and Jacob was now caught in it for all to see. Chapter 5. The Shocking Truth. As the projector flickered to life behind her, Lisa stood tall, her heart pounding, but her voice remained steady, cold with the weight of months of betrayal. The first image on the screen was enough to send a ripple through the crowd. Jacob, holding hands with Megan outside a hotel, the intimacy between them undeniable. But Lisa wasn't done. "You see," she said, turning her gaze to the stunned crowd, "while my husband was busy at work, he was also busy doing this." She tapped her phone again, and more photos flashed across the screen. Jacob and Megan at a restaurant, Jacob laughing as they sat side by side, and then another, more intimate shot of them entering a hotel late at night. The room fell into a shocked silence. Some of the guests audibly gasped, while others exchanged awkward glances. Co-workers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering to one another. Friends looked down, avoiding eye contact. But Lisa wasn't finished. The photos gave way to text messages, cold, undeniable proof of Jacob's deceit. The words on the screen revealed a man who had spent months leading a double life, arranging secret meetings, planning getaways, and feeding Megan the same lies he had been feeding Lisa. The texts revealed the full scope of Jacob's betrayal, exposing the false promises he had made to Megan about leaving his wife, about their future together. A collective murmur spread through the room. People leaned closer to each other, the whispers growing louder, but no one dared to speak aloud. Jacob's parents, sitting in the front row, looked horrified. His mother's hand clutched her chest, her face pale with shock. His father's lips were pressed into a thin line, unable to look up at the screen. Jacob, for his part, stood frozen on the stage, his confident, polished demeanor crumbling before everyone's eyes. He looked around the room as if searching for a lifeline, but there was none. His face was a mix of disbelief, fear, and humiliation. He stammered, trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Lisa, I can explain, he finally managed to say, his voice breaking under the weight of his lies unraveling. But Lisa wasn't about to give him a chance to weasel his way out. Don't bother explaining, she said sharply, cutting him off. Her voice, though calm, was filled with the fury of months spent in quiet torment, the rage of being lied to, betrayed, and manipulated. Everyone here now knows the truth. The final blow landed, and Jacob's shoulders slumped as the full weight of his exposure sank in. He was trapped, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The crowd remained silent, stunned by the revelation, but their reactions were clear. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated, heartless deception, and Jacob was the villain in the story. Chapter 6. The Mistress Enters. Just when the tension in the room seemed like it couldn't get any thicker, the door at the back of the room creaked open. All eyes shifted as Megan entered, her face pale and her steps hesitant. She was nervous, unsure of what was about to unfold, but her presence was undeniable. The room buzzed with confused murmurs as guests began to realize who she was. Jacob's eyes went wide with panic. His face drained of what little color remained, and his heart dropped as he saw Megan walk toward the stage. The reality of his situation crashed over him in waves. This wasn't just a private humiliation anymore. It was complete and utter destruction. Lisa, sensing the crowd's confusion, turned to face them again, her voice slicing through the tension like a knife. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her tone firm but controlled, meet Megan, the woman my husband has been spending more time with than me. The crowd's whispers turned into a low roar. The revelation was shocking enough, but the fact that Megan had shown up in person added an entirely new level to the drama. Everyone was now on the edge of their seats, eyes darting between Lisa, Jacob, and Megan. Some were speechless, others were already casting judgment on Jacob's deceit. But what came next was the real twist, the one that no one in the room saw coming. Instead of directing her fury at Megan, Lisa calmly walked toward her, closing the gap between them. There was a moment of hesitation in the air, as if the crowd was expecting a confrontation. But Lisa's actions silenced the room once more. She extended her arms and embraced Megan, who, though clearly shaken, accepted the gesture. The crowd, unsure of what to make of this turn, held their breath. Lisa stepped back, facing the audience again, her voice filled with icy resolve. Jacob told both of us lies, she said, her words clear and deliberate. He manipulated her just as he manipulated me. The room was dead silent. Lisa's revelation shifted the entire dynamic of the story. What had seemed like a simple case of infidelity was now something deeper, a tale of manipulation, betrayal, and deceit. Jacob hadn't just betrayed his wife. He had also deceived his mistress. Megan, still visibly shaken, took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice was shaky, but her words carried the weight of her own devastation. "I had no idea," she said, looking at Jacob with a mixture of anger and disgust. "He told me he was divorcing her. I never wanted this." The crowd was visibly unsettled now. What began as a scandal about an affair had turned into something far more sinister. Jacob had played them both, lying to Lisa while also stringing Megan along with false promises of a future that would never come. The room's perception shifted dramatically. This wasn't just a man who had cheated. This was a man who had built an entire web of lies to suit his own desires, regardless of the consequences for those around him. The whispers in the crowd turned darker, more judgmental. Jacob's colleagues began to exchange glances, silently re-evaluating the man they thought they knew. His friends looked away, uncomfortable in the knowledge that they had been duped by his charm for so long. Even his family, once proud of his success, now sat in stony silence, humiliated by the spectacle unfolding before them. Megan handed the microphone back to Lisa, her part of the story told. Lisa nodded at her, the silent exchange between them speaking volumes. They were not enemies. They were two women deceived by the same man, standing united against him. Lisa turned to Jacob one last time, locking eyes with him, her expression unwavering. "I think it's safe to say your time is up," she said, her voice echoing in the now quiet room. Jacob had no words left. He stood there, the weight of his actions crushing him as his once carefully crafted world came crashing down around him. There was no charm, no excuse, no lie left that could save him. Lisa had one, and she had done it in front of everyone who mattered. Chapter 7. The Final Blow. The room buzzed with chaos. Whispers had turned into full-blown conversations, friends and colleagues exchanging shocked glances as the weight of Jacob's deception fully sank in. His reputation, once pristine, was now shattered. He stood in the center of it all, motionless, as if hoping that if he stayed still long enough, this nightmare might disappear. But it was real. The judgment in the eyes of the people he had once counted as allies was undeniable. His boss, Michael, a stern man who had been one of Jacob's strongest supporters throughout his climb up the corporate ladder, was the first to approach him. The air was thick with tension as Michael stopped just inches from Jacob. His expression was cold, his jaw set in disappointment. "I trusted you," Michael muttered under his breath, his voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the room. This is unacceptable. You've embarrassed the company and yourself." Jacob opened his mouth to speak, to stammer out some kind of defense, but the words never came. There was nothing to say. He had been exposed, not just as an adulterer, but as a liar, a manipulator. The damage was done. Michael gave him one last look, then turned and walked away, leaving Jacob standing in a pool of his own humiliation. The room was slowly emptying. Co-workers who had once respected Jacob as a polished, professional leader now avoided his gaze, whispering among themselves as they gathered their coats and hurried toward the exits. Friends, people who had once celebrated his achievements, were quick to leave, unable to bear the awkwardness of the situation. In minutes, the lively celebration had turned into a mass exodus, the once buzzing room now eerily silent except for the occasional murmurs of disbelief. But Lisa wasn't done. She had one final move to make, the closing act in the drama she had so carefully orchestrated. As the last of the guests filed out, Lisa reached into her handbag, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth envelope she had prepared earlier. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times, and now, as she stood just a few feet from Jacob, she felt nothing but calm resolve. Jacob, still reeling from the public humiliation, looked up as Lisa stepped toward him, the envelope in her hand. His eyes were wide, filled with a desperate plea for mercy, but Lisa didn't waver. She met his gaze with cold determination, her voice steady as she held out the envelope. "I've already filed for divorce," she said, her tone firm and unwavering. Jacob's face went pale, his body stiffening as if bracing for another blow. He blinked, struggling to process her words, but Lisa didn't give him time to respond. She was in control now. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer on Monday," she continued, her voice as cold as the winter air outside. "And don't worry, I'll be keeping the house." The finality of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Jacob seemed frozen in place. He had lost everything: his reputation, his career, and now, his marriage. There was nothing left for him to hold on to. Lisa didn't wait for a response. She had already said everything that needed to be said. Without another glance at the man who had betrayed her, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the now empty room. As the door closed behind her, Jacob stood alone, the envelope still clutched in his hand, the reality of his downfall sinking in. There was no going back now. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. Lisa stepped out into the crisp night air, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she walked toward her car. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt light, free from the suffocating weight of deception and betrayal that had clouded her life for so long. The party, meant to celebrate Jacob's promotion, had instead marked the end of his carefully constructed facade. Everything he had worked so hard to hide had been ripped away, exposed for all to see, and Lisa had been the one to pull the final string. As she slid into the driver's seat, she took a moment to breathe, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. The events of the night played out in her mind, but there was no regret, no second-guessing. She had taken back control of her life, and with it, her future. With a small, satisfied smile, Lisa turned on the ignition, the hum of the engine steady beneath her hands. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the restaurant fading in the distance behind her, she glanced into the rearview mirror. Her face, once strained with the burden of Jacob's lies, now reflected calm determination. Sometimes, she said quietly to herself, her voice soft but filled with strength, the only way to move forward is to let go of what's holding you back. And tonight, she had done just that. As the car disappeared down the darkened road, the camera zoomed in on Lisa's face one last time, capturing the quiet triumph that marked the end of her journey. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. It was all behind her now. Ahead lay something new, something better. The screen faded to black, leaving behind a powerful reminder that sometimes, reclaiming your life means walking away from everything you thought you knew. And Lisa had done it with grace, dignity, and a quiet kind of vengeance that no one would forget. Lisa transforms from a wronged woman into a powerful force, showcasing her strength and resilience as Jacob's deception unravels. Her public confrontation of Jacob serves not only as revenge, but also as a reclaiming of her power, highlighted by the chaos of the party turning into his moment of shame. When she hands him the divorce papers, she embodies calm resolve and signifies her transformation from victim to victor. Lisa's confident departure symbolizes shedding old ties, illustrating that true liberation comes from letting go of those who no longer serve us. Ultimately, her journey emphasizes the importance of resilience and self-worth after betrayal.